welcome back to the second segment of Sex, Brains and Money. And we are here with our resident brainiac for the day, Anderson Todd, who is an enrichment educator and counselor, as well as president of the U of T Jungian Society. Thanks for joining us today, Anderson.
Thanks for having me on the show, Nikki.
No problem. So we're going to talk about psychedelic psychotherapies, which sounds so very, very cool. So let's get into it and tell us a little bit about what that means.
It's not just cool sounding and alliterative, it's actually really interesting.
Excellent.
So I think when most people think of psychedelics, they're really thinking back to kind of the Summer of Love, Timothy Leary, and certainly there was a lot of good research done then. And to sort of short form what happened in history, more or less, Richard Nixon got freaked out by Tim Leary and banned everything across the board.
Because he was such a great judge of character in so many ways.
He was, and a charming fellow.
Yes.
But the problem with that is that they really threw the baby out with the bathwater. And a lot of very, very promising sort of treatments, especially sort of psychotherapeutic treatments in combination with mind-altering chemicals, ended up being tossed into the wastebasket, even though they showed a lot of promise for things that don't otherwise have any treatment that we currently know of anyway.
Well, it seems that, you know, the legacy of Freud's talking cure is still with us, and, you know, the belief that you have to go through many, many years of therapy in order to overcome traumatic events or, you know, psychological illnesses and stuff like that. And yet you take a different approach and you feel that there are interventions that we can do that involve chemical substances that may be much more effective. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think that if you examine the evidence, even from the 1960s through the 1980s and some of the more recent stuff that's come up, one of the things that you consistently find people saying is that there are some chemicals, when used in combination with, you know, the talking cure, that seem to be able to affect, you know, 20 years worth of psychotherapy in 20 hours.
Wow, that's a nice little compression there.
It is. And one of the, you know, expressions that I like to toss around is that the open secret in psychotherapy and in psychiatry is that we really don't have any, we have nothing equivalent to an antibiotic for mental illness. We have only palliative treatments. So it would be a bit like if you broke your leg and they just gave you painkillers. You know, you don't feel it, then no problem. And that's more or less what we have. You start a pill, you take a pill, and you just keep taking it forever. What we don't have is something that you can take once. You're depressed, go in, take it once. 2 days later, you've had a series of insights, and then you're fine. And this is really the promise that that psychedelic psychotherapy seems to be offering based on the research.
Okay, well, stepping away from the legal aspects, because we know there are some, you know, substances that have been scheduled and some that are not. We can have a debate for hours upon hours about whether what's appropriate. But I understand you've done some research with one of the non-scheduled and therefore legal drugs. I believe you called it Iboga. Could you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, Iboga. The active chemical in Iboga is Ibogaine. Both of those are scheduled in the States, but they're in Canada they're fine. Okay. It's actually sort of amazing. Nixon swept up Iboga with everything else, and one of the ways that you can tell that it's really not a problem is that the black market down in the States picked it up in the mid-70s, you know, and started selling it. And very quickly, all of the drug dealers stopped selling it because they realized that it was costing them clients.
Oh, okay.
So people that were taking Iboga were suddenly not prey, you know, not sort of under the compulsion of their other addictions.
Okay.
And that's the real promise that Iboga seems to offer. So from the late 60s on, there were some experiences that people had where, for instance, they would take Iboga, have a series of visionary experiences, and suddenly find that they were no longer addicted to heroin. Full stop. No withdrawal.
And I can see why drug dealers would have a big problem with that.
Right, exactly. Not good for business. Now, in the States, it's still scheduled, meaning that they think it has no therapeutic value whatsoever, and it has abuse potential, and it's quite the opposite. So my own research with Iboga, which started 4 years ago, looked at generalizing the properties of Iboga in a way that lots of researchers, I think, have not paid enough attention to. And one of the interesting things about Iboga and Ibogaine is that it seems to be able to treat a wide variety of different addictions: cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, alcohol, eating disorders, etc. All of that says that probably whatever Iboga is doing, it's doing that at a very deep brain level, something that's below the level where the sort of individual chemicals are interacting with the brain. And so the research application that I sort of started with and have been trying to develop you know, more precisely over the last few years is to use it to treat love sickness.
Love sickness, so heartbreak or the depression that you experience after a breakup.
Right, exactly. Anybody that's gone through a breakup, that horrible chewing feeling, that bargaining feeling, that obsessive mentation, that I will, call you and do anything and I can't eat and I can't sleep, these are withdrawal symptoms.
I think that's something that most of us are unfortunately familiar with.
Yeah, unfortunately. And, I think that, one of the things that we've treated this as sort of a sacrosanct form of illness for some reason, and yet nobody enjoys it. We've all gone through the horrible pain of it. What if you could resolve your issues in heartbreak, in depression, in anxiety, and whatever in 48 hours instead of 6 months? And that's, I think, the real promise of what this field is starting to offer.
So is there any ongoing research that you're aware of other than what you've been doing, or is this something that the psychological and psychiatric community is still sort of staying away from?
It depends on where you are. Here in Canada, we're starting to see some actually serious research, especially in some things that used to be scheduled, and now they're, LSD is actually getting renewed attention, as is psilocybin. On the legal end of things, yeah, there have been some good research projects on iboga. The military down in the States, of all things, has been doing research in treating post-traumatic stress disorder with MDMA, ecstasy, and that was publicized by Oprah, of all people. So you got to figure that by the time Oprah has it in her magazine, probably it's beginning to sort of skate across the public consciousness in a good way.
Yeah, there's pretty much no better barometer for entering the mainstream than making it to Oprah, basically.
Right, although it's a bizarre alliance to think of Oprah and the military working together to push ecstasy to treat people's anxiety disorders, but...
Well, that is one way of looking at it, and
Yeah.
I'm sure that the research potential for these drugs, hopefully there will be more attention paid to it. And of course, with research, the key is always getting funding from different universities and getting people to participate. And it sounds like something that you are certainly willing to participate in, so hopefully you can start getting yourself some funding to research this a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, in fact, the university, by and large, has been quite open to the idea. Now, of course, there's all kinds of ethics boards and so on and so forth. They want to make sure that things don't turn into the debacle that they did at Harvard in the 60s. But there is actually a lot of renewed interest in it. I think that as the culture has moved past the 60s, and they've looked back on it in a way to realize that there were real contributions to the culture by some of these psychedelics. Steve Jobs famously, right, talked about how his work was inspired in that direction, and I think that it's beginning to once again become academically acceptable and more generally culturally acceptable.
Well, that definitely sounds like progress. So just to wrap things up, what would you like to see happen with that sort of research? What do you think that we're starting to move in the right direction? What else would you like to see happen in addition to what's going on already?
I would like to see, and my own current research is moving towards, I would like to see the development of psychedelic psychotherapies that take us beyond just treating illnesses and into the more positive psychology range. So instead of just dealing with people's deficiencies, there's an expression that I like to use a lot, my friends and colleagues are familiar with, that I say, there's crazy and then there's crazy, but everybody is crazy. And we could all, in a certain sense, benefit from, being able to develop increased creativity, increased memory, increased cognition, and breaking through our emotional blockages. I think it has very widespread potential in the near future. That's
good to hear. And as you know, I'm very much a proponent of positive psychology. And John Vervaeke, who's been on the show in the past, spoke about flow. He's going to come back in a future episode to talk about mindfulness meditation. And you're right. I think psychology needs to move in a different direction where we try and figure out what we can do to help humanity as a whole instead of just trying to kill things or to cure things that we perceive to be illnesses. So thank you very much, Anderson. I'm glad you were able to come on the show today. Great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so back to a commercial break, 2 minutes, and we'll be back with Michael Erickson from the Glad Day Bookshop. Stay tuned.